Hey everybody, what's up and welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Liz, your host here at Crimes Untold. In part one of this video, which I kind of alluded that it was going to be one giant video, but so part one of this video of the Ypsilanti Ripper / Michigan serial murderer, this lovely man, John Norman Collins, we started talking about some of his victims, and today we're going to finish it off. I'm going to kind of recap a little bit about his MO, so his modus operandi, if you don't know what that means. So basically, with the first 4 victims we have, he has a different type of an MO that the police are not really like, they're like, hey, we can link 3 of them, but we can't link all 4 of them. The only one that kind of sticks out is Jane Nixer, because her death is different. She was shot, but there's no mutilation to her body. So all of the victims so far, like I previously mentioned, I'm just going to go over this really quick. All were found within 15 miles of Washtenaw County. All were brunettes. All had something tied around their neck, like strangulation or like a garrote type tool. If you don't know what a garrote is, basically it's something that's around your neck and you can pull it. So it causes lack of oxygen, hence its ligature strangulation using a garrote type tool. All except for Jane Nixer were stabbed in the neck with something or their throat was slashed. All were on their period at the time of their murder, hence this then debunks my initial theory when I was first researching this case that he was grossed out because they were on their period, but clearly that's not the case because he still sexually assaulted a lot of them. A bulk of them, we'll say. Anywho, so the police were able to deduce at this point that 3 of the 4 murders were related to one another. And this just means that they're keeping Jane Nixer's solo, which I previously mentioned, because of her circumstances of death, which we'll get back to at the end of this video when I talk about certain things. And the other 3 were part of his serial killing. But this would not stop our perpetrator or alleged perp for these victims. So the next body would be found, that is of a 13-year-old Dawn Louise Basom. Now, she was found dead on the side of a rural desolate road in Ypsilanti. This was at around 6:30 a.m. on April 16th, which is just a few weeks after the murder of Marilyn Skelton. So Dawn's murder is a little bit different though, because after a certain point, serial killers start changing little things here and there of their MO because their thrill is getting more enticing. They want to change it up a little bit. They want to try and throw people off of their radar. So Dawn too had been strangled to death, but this time with electrical flex that was about 2 feet long. She had been stabbed multiple times in the chest, and she also had been stabbed in the vagina as well, which is something that we haven't seen yet. We have seen him, forcefully sodomize somebody with an object, just not being stabbed in the vagina with a knife. So this is different. She had a handkerchief shoved in her throat in order to muffle her cries or her screams while she was being tortured. Her death was vicious. There were slash marks found on her stomach, butt cheeks, and on her breasts as well. It couldn't thoroughly be proven that she was sexually assaulted, but it is believed that she was prior to her death. She was last seen alive on April 15th, so just the day prior, at around 7:30 p.m. And this is when she was leaving her friend's home and she was less than a mile away. When she was less than a mile away, she was walking with her friend Earl Kidd. Well, for some of the walk, anyway. So Earl told the police that when he was questioned, he was walking with Dawn, and they went their separate ways when she was about 5 blocks away from home. And this is when he saw her kind of like veer off course, if you will, and she was walking along the railroad tracks. There's only one person that could verify possibly seeing a girl or try to verify where she was in the last scene on that evening. But this fully couldn't be verified because this person just saw a girl walking. They didn't know if it was Dawn or not. And this was at around 7:35 p.m., which is just 5 minutes after the last time Earl saw her. The location where items belonging to her were found is interesting as well because it's similar to around the area of where our next victim is found. So her belongings were found in an abandoned farmhouse no more than 100 yards away. They found her sweater, which was an orange mohair sweater, but that's not all. They found glass particles that were similar to the ones found on her shoes, on her sweater. These particles were also found in the basement of this farmhouse. So also in the basement of this farmhouse, they found fresh bloodstains that were determined to be of human origin. There was electrical flex, similar to that was wrapped around her neck, and there was also another article of clothing that was deemed to belong to her as well. The police were aware this is where she was killed, and where her body was found, this is where she was left. The police then would continue to search this property, and eventually they would find an earring that belonged to Marilyn Skelton and a piece of Don Bason's blouse in the basement. So this is the other article of clothing that was found. So this means that the killer was still returning to this property, even though the police weren't present or the serial killer was just trying to leave his trophies there. The police were unsure now, they were sure now that these murders were linked officially with these trophies they found. So they found a piece from Marilyn Skelton, they found a piece from Don Bason, so they instantly connect those two together. When they find these trophies, they're deliberately placed, which meant that there was a specific thought process behind where they were, and they couldn't refute that. So following the searching of this farmhouse, somebody tried to burn it down on May 13th, and when it was extinguished, police found something odd. In the driveway, there was 5 lilac clippings, like a bushel of them, and they were laid in a distinct way. This was kind of like a calling card of acknowledging that there was 5 victims of this serial killer. Or at the time, there was only 5 victims found. Now remember, you have to separate Jane Mixer from these 5 that we've already seen. So take away Jane Mixer and there's only 4. So does that mean there's a fifth victim? Well, here's the thing. On June 9th, less than 2 months after the discovery of Don Bason, the body of a semi-nude woman would be found in a field by 2 teenagers. This woman would be found in front of an abandoned farmhouse that's located on North Territorial Road. This woman was deemed to be raped. Couldn't be determined whether it was antemortem or postmortem. They couldn't determine that. She had several stab wounds and slash wounds that spanned her entire body. 2 of her stab wounds pierced her heart as well, so she would have died instantaneously. It is believed that she raised her hands in a way to protect her face, and this was from she was trying to protect her face so she wouldn't get shot. Well, they determined this because there was a GSW to the thumb on her right hand when she was shot. And the gunshot, that's a gunshot wound. So the gunshot wound, the rest of it, is if she has a gunshot wound on her thumb right here, it penetrated her forehead. And this wound happened prior to her neck being severed to her spine. So this woman endured a gunshot wound, which then could tie Jane Mixer back into this because of the gunshot wound. Plus, she had her neck slashed so severe that it severed her spine, and she's mutilated. So he's now escalating. I believe he's escalating because all of his trophies were found, hence why he tried to burn down the abandoned farmhouse, hence why he left his calling card of having 5 victims. He's escalating to the point where, hey, I'm pissed off because you found my shit. Yes, so this victim would be identified on the following day, which is June 10th. This was 21-year-old Alice Elizabeth Kalom, or Kalom, it's K-A-L-O-M, and she was a graduate of the University of Michigan who had gone missing on June 8th, so she would be found the next day. She, like her previous victims, was walking home on Thompson Street after coming home from a party. When they searched the area, it produced 2 buttons that were missing from her raincoat and dried blood stains, several of them. And this was deemed to be the place in which she was murdered. And then she was put where she was found. This place that they found these was a commercialized gravel pit that's in Northfield Township, and this was proclaimed on June 10th. So ultimately, some claims after she's found, there are some claims that only a few of the murders are related and that Jane Mixer was a solo killing, like I've already previously mentioned. And Kalom and Mixer possibly were killed by the same person. So now they have linked Alice Colomb and Jane Mixer together, and then the rest are from a different person. But Alice is not our last victim. Oh no. 18-year-old Karen Sue Beineman was reported missing by Sherry Green after Karen didn't return home. And this is when she didn't return home in time for her curfew. There were students at Eastern Michigan University. Well, they were students there. And when she didn't return home to their dorm, Sherry freaked out. Karen was last seen on July 23rd of 1969, which is a little over a month after the death of Alice Colomb. I'm going to keep pronouncing it in a different way. I'm just going to call her Alice. So, this murder is way worse than the prior 6, because this now is victim number 7. Her body was found on July 26th, so 3 days after she went missing. Her body was found along Huron River Parkway. She was found face down in the gully, and she was nude. She was beaten extensively with a blunt object. Parts of her skin were missing due to being removed because of the beating. And her skin was so lacerated that her parts of it were coming off because of how densely this person beat her. Her supplemental cause of death was blunt force trauma or blunt force injuries, but she was determined to be strangled to death. So that's her primary cause of death, and supplemental is blunt force trauma. And this trauma is to her skull, and they were so severe that they would have been fatal. So I believe that after she was beaten in the head, obviously she's unconscious. She would have bled out due to the blunt force trauma of her skull, but that's when this person strangled her to death. So the instrument in which they used in order to beat her, they have never formally identified or found. She had also been raped pre-mortem or ante-mortem, and it was found that she had a piece of cloth shoved in her throat after having some type of caustic substance forcibly ingested in her system, which this too is something different that we haven't seen yet. And the cloth that was used to it was used to muffle her screams while she was being beaten. So post-rape, her torn underwear were then forcefully shoved into her vaginal canal. There was a presence of 509, which is there was a presence of 509 hair clippings, which will recirculate back to and there was also semen present as well. So the hair clippings were deemed to not be hers due to them being blonde in origin, and she was brunette. We'll circulate back to this in a little bit. So the part about the hair intrigues me because she was actually last known going to a wig shop, but the hairs are not from the wigs. So her roommate had informed the police that she was headed to a wig shop before, on the last day she was seen alive. But the media had other plans with her killing. They thought that her killing was a part of a sexualized satanic ritual. In this case, in that of the murder of Alice Colomb, also, they didn't get enough media coverage because of blackouts that were happening, and so widespread coverage of their murders was not in it. It wasn't even a thought at that point. So the police went to the wig shop and they ended up asking around. Apparently Karen bought a headpiece that was about $20 worth, and she was seen with a young man outside of the shop. This man was on a blue motorcycle. He had a side part for his hairline. It was dark and short, and he was wearing a sweater with a horizontal stripe pattern on it. So the motorcycle, they thought at first it was a Honda 350 model, but ultimately it turned out that it was actually a Triumph. Thankfully for us, this description was heard by a patrolman named Larry Mathewson, who said, "Hey, I know who this is. This is John Collins," somebody we've already mentioned. John Collins had a motorcycle and was seen driving around campus that same afternoon on July 23rd. Collins was questioned on the 25th, and he said that he stopped and had a simple conversation with an ex-girlfriend while he was riding his Triumph Bonneville. And after this conversation, the patrolman showed a picture of Collins to the workers in the wig shop, and they were like, "Oh my God, this is the same guy." Collins would be linked to the murders, and police would also find out about his reputation. Collins was a thief and he was evicted from his fraternity house because he was stealing from his roommates. He was also known to have a bad temper and loved sexual violence. Yes. It is also known for a fact that he had raped a woman because she didn't give in to his advances. How sweet. Also, another fact is that he lived near all these women. Mary Flazar and Joan Shell were his neighbors. Dawn Basin lived in an apartment complex across the road from where John's most recent girlfriend lived, so this meant that he would have become acquainted with Dawn, or so, like, generally speaking, he would have known or come to have known all of these women. John was finally arrested after the police had searched a family member's home, in which they found ammonia, they found a can of spray paint, and they found a box of detergent. They also found paint marks on the floor of the basement to try and conceal things. But that wasn't all. They also found blood stains in 9 various spots that were a type A match, which matched Karen Sue Beineman. So remember how I talked about the hairs they found on Karen? Well, these hairs were similar to the ones found in the basement of the home, in which it was a match to Karen, and this puts Karen at this house. So there's no refuting that John was at this house with a ruse of, he basically said to these family members, which is his aunt and his uncle, that he would feed their dog while they were away, while they were vacationing. And he used their house as his place of torture. That's what he did. The hairs that were found were from his, I would say, his aunt and uncle's son, where his aunt cut their son's hair, and that was all the hair clippings. She didn't clean it up right away. So this hair found on Karen puts him at the crime scene. He then is arrested for the murder of Karen Sue Beineman, or Beineman, on July 30th of 1969. He was arraigned on August 1st for the murder, and he was held without bond. So after he was arraigned, the police department gets a phone call from Salinas, California, their police department, in which they believe that John Collins is connected to a murder that happened out there. So this is the murder of 17-year-old Roxy Ann Phillips that transpired on June 30th. On August 3rd, they tried to deem a connection for the Phillips case to Collins. And it's believed that Collins and his roommate at the time, Andrew Manuel, had driven to Monterey, California on June 21st with his Oldsmobile Cutlass, that was gray, and after the trip, he would return to Michigan without Manuel. Manuel went to Arizona. So while investigating, someone who knew Phillips said she became acquainted with a man named John from Michigan and described this man and it's identical to that of John Collins. Phillips' body would be found on July 13th in a ravine off of the Carmel Highlands. She was strangled to death with a belt that went to her dress, and it was knotted around her neck, like that of a garrote. She also was missing an earring, and the remainder of the items were found scattered along Route 68. So he probably took the earring as a souvenir or a trophy. So after reviewing all of this information, they announced that there was a connection to this murder as well. She was connected to the other murders. His trial for the initial arrest, he entered a plea of diminished capacity, and that they didn't believe him. He would be found guilty on August 19th of 1970 for a first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life without parole. So with the California case, they wanted to indict him for the murder, but due to his appeals process and if he was convicted in California, he still would be sent back to Michigan to serve out his sentence there, and then they would have to extradite him back to California to face this sentence. He was never tried for the remaining murders, but it is clear that he had something to do with them as well. So back to Jane Mixer. So Gary Earl Leiterman was charged in connection to the murder of Jane Mixer on July 11th of 2005. His DNA was found on the stockings that were on her body, and they tested this DNA after her case was reopened in 2001. He was found guilty, and he's never been considered a suspect in the remainder of the murders. So that, my friends, is the Ypsilanti Ripper, John Norman Collins, Part 2. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys in another video.